Magnus, you and I have worked together for a really long time, and now you're part of Pinchpoint Communications Board, which I'm delighted about. In this podcast, I wanted to talk to you about the really, really shocking and upsetting news with Lucy Letby and the case of those absolutely outrageous murders. There's been a lot of talk about reputation management. What does that mean to you?
Interesting question. Classically, of course, reputation management is about changing or influencing the way people think of an organisation by changing or influencing what they see or hear about it. But it must go deeper than that. The problem is that if you use that definition, you leave behind sometimes, if you're not careful, the actual purpose of an organisation. So specifically, for example, in the NHS, we're constantly told, aren't we, about patient safety comes first. Well, if you're more concerned about your reputation, the brand image, if you like, in commercial terms, of your organisation, than you are about patient safety, your reputation can lie in tatters before you know it. So in other words, reputation management isn't about what we used to call spin. It's actually about something much deeper than that. It's about management processes, I believe. And what the Letby case exposed, I think, not for the first time, sadly, in the NHS, was that some, at least in the NHS, at least some of the time, are more concerned with that image, that brand of their hospital trust or whatever, than they are with patient safety, or at least that's the way it looks on the outside. So genuine reputation management in the NHS should always be about how you manage the organisation to ensure that the things you say you do are in fact the things that you deliver.
And one of those mechanisms is what we call the sort of risk register, or the way that the leadership of an organisation looks at the things that could affect it financially, reputationally, from a staffing perspective, and actually making really tough decisions.
Correct.
Is what, for me, what in my experience, in my job, and the times when I've come to you for advice or counsel, is because actually we've got to make a really hard decision here to face up to the truth.
That's exactly right, Sarah. The truth is that the truth is always less dangerous than dissembling, than hiding, than trying to make excuses. And people are, in general, actually quite forgiving about the fact that people do make mistakes. Things happen.
Absolutely. And I'm really, really passionate about active leadership and active management. And, you know, when I worked at First Group more than 20 years ago, when you and I first met, you know, it was ingrained in us, the importance of getting out into the organisation, of going to ticket offices and listening, of, you know, we cleaned a train as a team building exercise with the executives. And, you know, one of the things that sort of brings me out in hives is when managers say, I've got an open door policy.
Yeah.
Because to me, that is just this image of a manager in their office with their door open, waiting for someone to come.
Indeed. And would you go and knock on it?
No.
I'm not sure that most people would.
No. I think it's so hard to, you know, think that you've got an issue, to then leave your place of work, to seek out the person that you want to talk to, which is why I'm really passionate about people being in the business. And that's really important, isn't it? And as communicators, when we talk about staff engagement, for example, stakeholder management, you've got to get out there.
Absolutely, you have. And I can't help feeling that in the Lucy Letby case, if managers had actually been in that ward, not just visiting it occasionally, as I assume they may have done, but to actually be there to see the problems that those staff were facing, the fact that they were overstretched, for instance, which was a fundamental problem in its own right, let alone what was going on behind people's backs. If they'd seen that at first hand and they'd listened on the job, as it were, to people on the front line. One of the things I think you and I have learned over the years is it's the front line who always know. They always know where things are going wrong, how they're going wrong, and possibly even how to put them right. And if we don't listen to them, peril lies in our way.
So one of the things that I've always been really interested in, Magnus, picking up on your point about the truth, is how hard that is sometimes for organisations to recognise. That there's almost this feeling in management that you can't show weakness. And somehow, sometimes telling the truth is admitting that things have gone wrong. And actually, there's great power in that, isn't there?
There is. There are power games, of course, being played out throughout the NHS and every organisation we know. And time and again in the NHS, we do see whistleblowers regarded as snitchers, troublemakers, threats to reputation, and punished for it as well. So in the Letby case, doctors, for instance, were at one stage, who were right all along, were at one stage forced to apologise for suggesting that Lucy Letby may be at the heart of that case, instead of taking that hard decision you talked about to at least examine where the truth may lie, rather than trying to sweep it under the carpet, protect the organisation at all costs. And that's where the trouble lies. Listening is such an important skill of management and so often disregarded. I should say in passing, by the way, of course, you and I know there are many good managers in the NHS, and this doesn't happen universally, and there are many other organisations where this does happen. This is not just an NHS issue. I think the issue of the NHS is lives are at stake. You know, sometimes the consequences of failure to manage in the way we're suggesting is fatal.
And I think that's why it's so shocking to us, because, you know, nurses, doctors, teachers, scout leaders, all of these people have such levels of trust, high trust. But I do think it's really interesting, the conversation about regulation. And as someone, you know, who's had lots of experience of working in highly regulated organisations, I think regulation brings freedom. And, you know, my time on the Health and Safety Executive Board really taught me that actually, you know, when you have proportional regulation and proportional management, you end up with the freedom to take risks and to enable your staff to say that something doesn't feel right. And that's so important. Why do you think that the NHS, and as we've said, it's not just the NHS, but in this particular case, yet again, didn't give people that space to listen?
Well, I think it is. You touched on it a moment ago. It is about the power vacuum that exists in all organisations. The fact that at the top, people feel that if their power is threatened in some way, and power comes from reassuring oneself that we've made the right decisions, doesn't it? You know, that we're all powerful. And to admit that we might have failed in any way is a really, really hard decision. And I think all of us need to re-examine that fear of failure and say, as you say, risk is not the same thing as failure.
No.
So we do need to take some risks with the way we manage our people, but at the same time be ready to accept where the truth really lies.
And I think one of the things I really hope, and one of the great privileges of being a communicator, of being someone who is brought into organisations to help them navigate change or difficulty, issues or sometimes crises, is when a chief exec will say to me, Sarah, I am prepared to make that hard decision. I'll close that bit of the organisation. We'll stop doing that thing. Or sometimes I will take that person through the appropriate mechanism. And if they have to leave, I'm comfortable to do that. And I think sometimes you and I have talked in the past about communicators being the conscience of organisations.
I think that's right. I think the role of communicators is misunderstood, isn't it, Sarah, sometimes? And actually sometimes we are the only people who are in a position to be able to say, look, let's look again at this, let's actually examine where the problem truly lies here.
I think the importance of a communicator having the confidence of the board, of the chair, of the chief exec, of the head teacher, you know, is so important, because you have to be able to ask the really challenging questions.
Absolutely so. I remember the very first book I ever read on public relations many years ago said that what was then always called the public relations manager's office should be next door to the chief executive. For exactly the reason you say, we need to be asking the hard questions.
Magnus, we talked for a long time over the years about the vital role that communicators have in speaking truth to power. And that really is the central point of our role, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. And the message we need to get across always is that in the end, truth will be less damaging to reputation than obfuscation and denial.
I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's always lovely to see you. And thank you very much for welcoming into your beautiful garden.
Pleasure.